The Terran Assembly Hall was a marvel of interstellar diplomacy, an enormous structure that blended the sleek efficiency of human architecture with the grandeur of alien design. Towering pillars lined the chamber, their smooth surfaces embedded with faintly glowing circuitry that pulsed in time with the rhythm of the vast planetary data network. Above, a dome of transparent alloy allowed an unfiltered view of Earth's sky, where the evening sun bathed the horizon in hues of orange and violet. It was a breathtaking display, meant to remind every species present of the beauty that war threatened to erase. Ambassador Cithran of the Vathari Dominion stood at the center of it all, his imposing silver-blue figure radiating quiet authority. His deep-set, iridescent eyes scanned the assembly with practiced calculation, noting the tense posture of some delegates and the carefully neutral expressions of others. This was a meeting of consequence, a moment that would determine the future of relations between Earth and his people. And yet, Cithran was uncertain. For years, he had studied humanity, their history, their contradictions. They were a species capable of great destruction, and yet, they sought peace with a fervor that defied logic. They possessed unmatched resilience in battle, yet they mourned their enemies with the same intensity as their own fallen. It was a paradox that disturbed the leaders of the Vathari Dominion. His people were warriors, their history defined by conquest and precision, yet humans wielded power in a way the Vathari could not fully comprehend. They fear war, he had told the High Council before departing for Earth, but not in the way you believe. They fear it not for themselves, but for their enemies. The Council had dismissed his claim as foolishness, as the sentimental delusions of one who had spent too long observing an inferior race. But now, standing in the heart of human diplomacy, he wondered if he had spoken a truth that even his own kind failed to grasp. A hush fell over the assembly as Chancellor Lucian Vale approached the podium. The leader of Earth's unified coalition was a man of deliberate movements, his sharp gaze sweeping across the chamber before settling on Cithran. The Vathari Dominion has questioned our stance on war, Vale began, his voice steady and unyielding. They wonder why we hesitate, why we negotiate, why we do not rush to battle as they do. Some call it weakness. He let the word linger, as if daring someone to challenge it. I say this, we do not hesitate out of fear. We hesitate out of respect for life. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, some approving, others skeptical. Cithran remained motionless, watching Vale with unreadable eyes. He had expected a speech that sought to reassure or persuade, but this was something different. This was a declaration. Footsteps echoed across the hall, drawing Cithran's attention to the figure approaching the stage. She moved with an unmistakable confidence, a fluid grace that spoke of experience and certainty. Her deep violet eyes shimmered beneath the glow of the assembly's lights, and the long auburn braid trailing down her back marked her with an effortless elegance. Ambassador Ilara Vane. He had read her name in countless reports, had seen her image in intelligence briefings. A woman known for navigating the treacherous tides of interstellar politics with a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind. She took her place beside Vale, meeting Cithran's gaze without hesitation. The Vathari believe that to understand a species, one must study their history, their wars, she said, her voice carrying a warmth that belied its underlying challenge. But history is written by those who survive. If you truly wish to understand humanity, then you must walk among us. Cithran's expression remained impassive, but his mind worked quickly. This was not an offer extended to every diplomat. It was a test, a means of stripping away the layers of formality and allowing him to see the truth beneath the carefully curated narratives of both their peoples. And if I refuse, he asked. Ilara tilted her head slightly, as though amused by the question. Then you return to your people with only what you have been told, not what you have seen. It was a challenge, subtle but undeniable. He had spent years arguing that humans were not what they seemed, that they could not be measured by conventional standards. This was his opportunity to prove it, not with words but with experience. Cithran stepped forward, inclining his head. Then show me, Ambassador. A small smile played at the corner of Ilara's lips, and for the first time, Cithran wondered if he had agreed to more than just a diplomatic observation. Outside the assembly hall, Earth stretched before him, vast and teeming with life. He had seen it from orbit, a blue world cradled in the endless dark, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer intensity of it up close. The streets pulsed with movement, humans navigating their daily lives with an energy that seemed boundless. Alara walked beside him, the city's neon glow casting fleeting highlights against her dark attire. "You've read about us," she said as they passed a bustling market, the scent of spices and fresh food mixing with the crisp evening air. "But you haven't felt us." Cithrin observed the crowd, the way laughter and heated discussions mingled without conflict, the way strangers helped one another without hesitation. It was a stark contrast to the rigid discipline of the Vathari, where every action served a purpose, every interaction was a calculation. "You fight to preserve this," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Alara nodded. "But not just for ourselves. We fight for those who can't." A group of children ran past, their laughter filling the air. A street musician strummed an instrument unlike anything Cithrin had encountered before, his voice carrying a melody that was both foreign and oddly familiar. Everywhere he looked, there was movement, connection, emotion. They walked in silence for some time until they reached a quieter district, where the city lights gave way to open parks and ancient structures that had stood for centuries. Alara stopped near a fountain, the water glistening under the starlight. "You still don't believe it, do you?" she asked, watching him closely. Cithrin turned his gaze to her, considering his words. "I believe that you value life. What I do not understand is why you extend that value even to your enemies." Alara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "Because compassion isn't a weakness. It's our greatest strength." Cithrin studied her, searching for the deception, for the flaw in her logic. But there was none. She truly believed it. A gust of wind carried the scent of earth and rain, the promise of an approaching storm. Alara tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her expression contemplative. "You intrigue me, Alara Vane," Cithrin admitted at last. She smirked. "Good. You need to be intrigued if you're going to understand us." As the first raindrops fell, cool against his skin, Cithrin found himself wondering if humanity's strength lay not in their wars, but in their unwillingness to be defined by them. And as Alara turned to lead him further into the night, he followed, unknowingly stepping into a world that would change him forever. The rain fell in a slow, steady rhythm, dotting the pavement with glistening beads of water. The city had not quieted. If anything, the life within it only seemed to shift in response, adapting effortlessly. Humans scurried for cover, some pulling hoods over their heads, others laughing as they embraced the downpour. Cithrin observed it all, noting the casual resilience in their behavior. There was no fear, no resentment toward the elements, only acceptance and adaptation. Alara walked ahead of him, her movements unhurried, as if she welcomed the rain. Her dark coat clung to her frame, and a few loose strands of auburn hair stuck to her skin. She turned slightly, glancing back at him with a small, knowing smile. "Not what you expected?" she asked. Cithrin stepped beside her, his own garments untouched by the rain, his people's technology designed to repel water effortlessly. "I have studied your people's response to hardship," he replied, watching as a group of children splashed through puddles despite their parents' half-hearted attempts to scold them. "But I did not expect you to embrace discomfort." Alara chuckled. "That's the thing about humans. We make the best of it." She gestured to a nearby cafe, its warm interior glowing invitingly through large glass windows. "Come inside. I'll introduce you to another human custom, comfort food." Cithrin hesitated briefly before following her in. The air inside was rich with the scent of coffee, baked goods, and something sweet he couldn't quite identify. The low hum of conversation filled the space, punctuated by the occasional clink of ceramic cups against saucers. The atmosphere was intimate in a way he had never encountered in Vathari society. They settled into a corner booth, the light above them casting a soft glow over Alara's features. She tapped a few selections into a digital menu embedded in the table before leaning back, crossing her arms. "So, tell me something, Cithrin. Your people view us as unpredictable, even reckless." But you've studied us long enough to know that's only part of the truth. What do you think of us? Cithrin regarded her carefully. He had been asked that question many times before, but never in such a direct and personal way. He considered his response before speaking. You are not what the Vathari expected, he admitted. Your species does not follow the patterns we have seen in others. You should be weaker than you are, and yet you are not. You should fall apart under pressure, and yet you endure. You fear war, and yet you are terrifying in battle. Alara arched a brow, clearly amused. Terrifying, huh? Cithrin inclined his head. Your people do not fight to dominate. You fight to protect. And that makes you dangerous. Their drinks arrived, something warm and dark for Alara, a smaller, almost glowing amber liquid for Cithrin. He studied it before taking a sip, surprised by the balance of bitterness and warmth. He could taste subtle notes of something spiced, something soothing. Alara watched his reaction, then grinned. You like it? Cithrin set the cup down with a measured movement. It is unexpected. That's humanity in a nutshell. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze holding his. We surprise people. We care too much, fight too hard, love too deeply. This is why we'll never be conquered. Not really, Cithrin considered her words. Conquest. The Vathari were not here to conquer, not directly, but there had been whispers within his own government. The belief that Earth was a volatile force in the galaxy, one that could not be left unchecked. Some among his kind had already suggested that humanity should be subdued before they became a greater threat. Cithrin had disagreed. Now, sitting across from Alara, he realized that he had not been wrong. You love too deeply, he repeated, studying her. Is that a strength or a weakness? Her expression shifted, something softer flickering in her eyes. Depends on who you ask, she murmured. For a moment, the conversation lulled, the space between them filled with the quiet murmurs of the cafe. Outside, the rain continued to fall, blurring the neon lights of the city into soft, shifting hues. Then Alara smirked. So, Cithrin, tell me, do Vathari love? The question caught him off guard. Love was not something the Vathari often spoke of in such open terms. Their connections were structured, purposeful. Mating bonds were arranged for genetic compatibility and societal stability. Love, as humans defined it, was not a necessity. And yet, as he sat across from Alara, something in him hesitated. We form bonds, he answered carefully. But not as you do. Alara studied him, as if searching for something beneath his carefully chosen words. I think you're more like us than you realize. Cithrin wanted to deny it, to correct her, but for some reason he said nothing. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sudden chime of Alara's wrist device. She glanced at it, her expression tightening as she read the message. Duty calls, she muttered before standing. Come with me. I think you'll want to see this. They left the cafe and stepped into the damp night, the rain now a faint drizzle. A sleek, unmarked vehicle waited for them, and Alara climbed inside without hesitation. Cithrin followed, settling into the seat beside her. The vehicle moved smoothly through the city, weaving through streets that now carried a different energy. The vibrant life of the market and cafes faded, replaced by a more controlled and structured atmosphere. The buildings became taller, the streets quieter. They were heading toward a secure zone. What is this place? Cithrin asked. Alara exhaled, her fingers drumming lightly against her knee. A research facility, but more importantly, a sanctuary. The vehicle came to a stop before a heavily secured structure. The doors hissed open, and Alara led him inside, her pace quick but purposeful. Cithrin followed, his sharp gaze scanning their surroundings. The air here was different, cleaner, more sterile. The hum of advanced technology filled the halls. Alara stopped before a reinforced glass partition, motioning for him to look inside. Cithrin did, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, he felt something akin to shock. Beyond the glass was a collection of non-human figures, aliens of various species, some familiar, others unknown. They were wounded, some barely conscious, others recovering. Medical personnel, both human and alien, moved among them, tending to injuries, offering comfort. These are Vathari prisoners, Sithran observed, his voice unreadable. Alara shook her head. They're survivors. Some are refugees. Others were enemies, yes. But they're here because we don't leave people to die, even those we fought against. Sithran turned his gaze to her. Why? Her expression was unreadable. Because that's what makes us human. He looked back at the room, watching as a human doctor carefully tended to a wounded Vathari soldier. There was no malice, no triumph. Only care. Sithran exhaled slowly. He had come here to study humanity, to prove that his people misunderstood them. But as he stood in that facility, beside Alara, he realized something far more unsettling. It was not the humans who needed to understand the Vathari. It was the Vathari who needed to understand the humans. And he was beginning to wonder if, despite all his study, he had barely scratched the surface. The drive back to the diplomatic sector was silent. Sithran sat beside Alara, his mind still processing what he had seen at the sanctuary. The way humans cared for those they had once fought against, it defied every instinct of conventional warfare. In Vathari culture, war was absolute. Enemies were to be neutralized, not healed. Yet here, humanity had taken the broken remains of their adversaries and restored them. And they did it not out of obligation or strategy. They did it simply because they could. Alara, too, seemed lost in thought, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the condensation-covered window. It wasn't until they reached the city's central sector that she spoke. "You're quiet," she murmured. Sithran turned his gaze to her, his dark irises unreadable. "I am thinking," she smirked, though there was a tiredness to it. "That's a dangerous thing for a diplomat." Sithran let out a breath, something close to a laugh but not quite. Perhaps. The vehicle came to a stop in front of his assigned residence, a sleek, high-rise structure that housed foreign dignitaries. Alara didn't make a move to leave, instead watching him as if weighing a thought. Then, she sighed. "Come on." Sithran hesitated. "Where?" Alara shot him an exasperated look. "You've seen the worst of war. Let me show you why we fight in the first place." He had every reason to decline. Every diplomatic protocol dictated that he should retreat, document his findings, and report back to his superiors. But something in Alara's gaze held him there. Something unspoken. Sithran opened the door. They walked through the city, leaving behind the cold sterility of government buildings for the pulsing warmth of the streets. This was the heart of humanity. Their homes, their joy, their lives. Neon lights flickered in shifting colors. Music spilled from open doors. The scent of food lingered in the air. But it was not the technology or the vibrancy of the nightlife that caught Sithran's attention. It was the people. They gathered in groups, in pairs, in families. They laughed, argued, embraced. A couple stood under an awning, sharing a quiet moment as the rain fell around them. A mother lifted a child into her arms, spinning her in slow circles. Sithran had seen his people gathered before, but it was never like this. The Vathari assembled with purpose, meetings, ceremonies, calculations. Humanity gathered simply to be together. "Now you see it," Alara murmured beside him. Sithran turned his head slightly. "See what?" Alara gestured around them. "This, what we fight for. You asked why we love so deeply. This is why." She paused, her voice softer now. "You asked if it's a weakness or a strength. The truth is, it's both. It's what makes us reckless. And it's what makes us terrifying." Sithran let his gaze drift over the city once more. He had spent years studying the concept of war, yet in this moment, he understood that he had never truly grasped its depth. The Vathari saw war as strategy. The humans saw it as survival, not just of their bodies, but of everything they loved. He exhaled slowly. "You fight as if you have everything to lose." Alara nodded. "Because we do." For the first time in his life, Sithran envied a species. A commotion down the street caught their attention. A small gathering had formed near the entrance of a modest establishment, voices raised in surprise and amusement. Sithran's instinct was to assess the situation for danger, but Alara merely grinned. Perfect timing. She grabbed his wrist, pulling him forward before he could protest. The crowd parted slightly, revealing a raised platform where performers had gathered. A band had set up, their instruments humming with energy, their lead singer warming up the crowd. The atmosphere was electric, expectant. Alara nudged him. Ever seen live music? Sithran had heard of it, of course. The Vathari had performances, though they were orchestrated, structured to perfection. This, however, was something else entirely. The first notes rang out, a slow and deliberate melody, carrying through the air with effortless grace. And then the energy shifted. The music surged, the beat pulsing through the ground beneath them. The crowd responded instantly, moving in waves, bodies swaying and dancing without hesitation. Sithran stood stiffly, uncertain. Alara laughed. Don't just stand there. She took his hand, her touch warm against his own cooler skin. Come on, Diplomat. You spend all your time studying humans. Try being one for a night. He could have refused. He should have. But as the music wrapped around them, as Alara's fingers intertwined with his, something within him gave way. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, Sithran let himself be lost in the moment. They moved together, not in perfect rhythm but in something more natural, more real. Alara's laughter was bright, her eyes gleaming with mischief as she twirled, her grip never loosening. Sithran followed her lead, adapting, finding a strange exhilaration in the unfamiliarity of it all. The music swelled, the world narrowing down to movement, sound, and the way Alara's presence seemed to pull him into something he had never experienced before. It was intoxicating. When the song finally ended, they were breathless, the warmth of the crowd pressing around them. Alara grinned up at him. Not bad for your first time. Sithran exhaled, the unfamiliar sensation of adrenaline still buzzing through him. I believe I am beginning to understand your species. Alara arched a brow. Oh! His gaze lingered on her a fraction longer than necessary. Yes, she didn't look away, and neither did he. For all the cultural studies, the political negotiations, the endless reports on humanity's strengths and weaknesses, none of it had prepared him for this. For the quiet intensity of Alara's expression. For the way her presence had shifted from curiosity to something else. Something neither of them dared to name. A voice from the calm interrupted them, breaking the moment. Alara's face darkened as she listened. We need to go. Sithran stiffened. What happened? She met his gaze, all traces of laughter gone. An attack. Everything around them, the music, the warmth, the fleeting joy, vanished in an instant. Sithran followed her without question, because now he understood. This was why humans feared war. Not because of what they might lose, but because of what they were willing to do to protect it. The cityscape blurred past them as Alara drove. Her expression hardened into something unshakable. The warmth of the evening, the music, the laughter. It was all a distant memory now. Sithran sat beside her, watching the lights flicker against the rain-streaked window, his mind already piecing together the implications of what was happening. Where? He asked. Alara's hands tightened around the wheel. Outer District. Coordinated attack. Not from Vathari. Not from any official faction we've been monitoring. Sithran frowned. Then who? She exhaled sharply. Rogue elements. Mercenaries. Maybe even deserters from past wars, trying to reignite something for profit. It made sense. Whenever peace settled, there were always those who thrived in chaos, seeking to profit from instability. Sithran had seen it before, fringe groups that operated outside of even the most ruthless military structures. But what made this troubling was the timing. Your leaders will assume this is an act of war, Sithran said. And they will retaliate. Alara's gaze flicked to him. Exactly. And if we don't stop it now, everything we've worked for is gone. The vehicle screeched to a halt outside a command center, and before Sithran could say anything, Alara was already moving, striding forward with a soldier's precision. He followed, ignoring the stares of human officers as they registered his presence. A holographic map flickered to life at the center of the room, displaying a section of the city's outskirts. Darkened buildings, emergency signals flashing in red. Small heat signatures marked enemy positions, and closer still, a cluster of civilians caught in the chaos. "Damn it," Alara muttered. "They're targeting a shelter." Cithrin studied the map, his mind calculating probabilities, possible strategies. "What defenses do you have in place?" "Patrols were light. We weren't expecting a direct strike. They cut off power to the sector, no automated response, no quick evac. We don't have time to wait for reinforcements." Cithrin turned to her. "Then we go now." Alara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Gear up." Minutes later, they moved through the darkened district, the air thick with the scent of smoke and something metallic. The distant echoes of gunfire rattled the silence, but it wasn't the chaos of open warfare. It was methodical, controlled. Whoever these attackers were, they weren't here to fight, they were here to send a message. Alara motioned for Cithrin to stay close, her rifle at the ready. He wasn't armed, diplomats weren't meant for combat, but he was far from helpless. The Vathari were not warriors by human standards, but they were built for endurance, for adaptability. And Cithrin had studied humans long enough to know how they fought. They moved through the ruins of a collapsed structure, stepping over shattered glass and broken metal. Then, the sound of voices. A group of armed figures stood near the shelter's entrance, their weapons trained on a cluster of civilians huddled behind overturned debris. A woman shielded a child with her body, her expression frozen in defiance even as one of the mercenaries raised his weapon. Cithrin didn't think. He acted. In an instant, he surged forward, closing the distance before the gunman could react. His hands found the attacker's arm, twisting it sharply. A cry of pain, a weapon clattering to the ground. Cithrin moved fluidly, using his opponent's weight against him, driving him into the nearest wall with bone-crushing force. Alara was already firing precise shots, taking down the others before they could retaliate. The remaining mercenaries scrambled for cover, but the element of surprise had already been lost. Cithrin turned in time to see one last enemy raise a weapon toward Alara. She didn't see him. Cithrin moved before he could think. The impact was immediate. Pain tore through him as the shot connected, but he barely registered it. His body collided with Alara's, knocking her to the ground just as the second shot fired, missing by inches. Alara reacted instantly, rolling out from beneath him and returning fire. The last attacker fell, the silence that followed deafening. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Alara turned to him, her breath coming in quick, uneven gasps. "Cithrin, I am fine," he said, though the burning in his side suggested otherwise. He pressed a hand to the wound, his fingers coming away slick with dark, Vathari blood. Alara's jaw clenched. "That was reckless," Cithrin exhaled. "You would have done the same." She didn't argue. Instead, she reached for his arm, pulling him to his feet. Her grip was firm, steady, but there was something else in her eyes. Something raw. The civilians were safe now, the enemy neutralized. Yet, in that moment, none of it mattered as much as the way Alara was looking at him. "You didn't hesitate," she said quietly. Cithrin held her gaze. "Neither did you." Something shifted between them then. Something neither of them had the words for. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't just survival. It was something deeper, something unspoken yet understood. Alara shook her head, exhaling a laugh that was equal parts disbelief and relief. "You're a terrible diplomat," Cithrin smirked despite the pain. Perhaps. Her hands lingered on him for a fraction longer than necessary, and when she finally let go, something in her expression had softened. The city remained silent in the aftermath of the attack, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence before a storm. Cithrin understood now. Humans feared war not because they were weak, but because when pushed, when forced to protect what they loved, they became something terrifying. And in that moment, with Alara standing beside him, Cithrin realized that he had not just studied humanity. He had become part of it.